Hey everyone, Bailey here. I'm having to manage my own technology today, so bear with me if I get something wrong. I think I'm okay. I'm really excited. We're gonna have my good friend Lennie Larkin today. You might know her from B-Side Flower Farm. She's had a lot of change in her life lately. We'll talk about that. And also she's got some big projects cooking, all on the topic of business. We're gonna talk all about business today. So I assume if you're watching, it's because you are in the business of flower farming or getting started in the business of flower farming. So if you have questions about that, just let me know. So good morning to my friends on the West Coast and good midday to my friends on the East Coast and somewhere in between for those of you in the middle. And for those of us on the other side of the ocean, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So I'm enjoying a nice little gin tonic today. I'm traveling, so I'm not at home at my usual location, but well, it's still 5 o'clock. So cheers, everyone. 2 weeks ago, I didn't mention that I had just gotten back from Israel. I went to visit Danziger cut flowers. You probably know them most from the Scoop Scabiosa. So I've been in a friendly relationship with Danziger for about 6 years now. Scoop Scabiosas, after some of the unusual Lisianthus, were one of the first products that I went out there looking for. And Danziger's been a great partner, really supportive at bringing new varieties to the American audience, the same varieties that big commercial growers around the world are using. So really, we do have access to the same stuff that the big guys have, specifically because Danziger is willing to cooperate, and they're just really a great business partner for me and for you. So to that end, we're going to talk a lot about Scoop Scabiosas and really all of Danziger's products in the next few weeks. I know a lot of you have your scoops starting to bloom now, so take a bunch of pictures. We're going to do some photo contests. We're going to have a way for you to enter to win some free trays of Scoop Scabiosa, just based on photos of a single flower, of a bunch of flowers, of the minute design, of you and your pretty face holding some Scoop Scabiosa. They're really one of our favorite crops. So I'm excited to see how you are doing with them. They've always been a favorite of mine, and I even have some rooted and ready to go on our farm in Madeira. So I'm gonna see how I do with scoops in my new location. I have a feeling they're gonna be very happy. If you have questions about the business of flower farming, post them in the comments or send a direct message. Felicia's standing by to compile those. We'll answer as many as we can. We've gotten a couple already. And now I'm gonna bring in my good friend Lennie, and we're gonna catch up with each other, I'm sure. Just give me a second while I figure out how to bring someone in here. There we go. All right, let's see if this will happen. Lennie, is it you?
Hi, it is me. Wow, I moved really close to my camera. That is me, up close, first thing in the morning. That's great. Good morning. Hi.
I know how you love mornings.
It's like I'm not a morning person, but I'm also really not a night person. So I don't know where I thrive. It's rough. It's rough being me.
You always thrive.
Yeah, thank you. And I've got this guy on my lap. The last time Bailey saw me, I was like, allergic to dogs. I'm still allergic to dogs, but couldn't care less about them. And now I have this appendage. So it's another change in my life.
Yeah, tell me about some of the other changes.
Yeah, thanks. Well, hi everyone. And first of all, thanks Bailey for having me, and thanks Felicia and your team, who is a friend also and just so wonderful. So we just moved to Oregon. I built my business in California over the past 10 years. I learned how to farm in California. I have to get him off my lap because this is quiet. Built my business in California over 10 years after going to the UC Santa Cruz Farm and Gardening program in 2011, I think it was, as my transition into farming. And we, it became time to buy land. We were finally in the position to buy some land and a house. after years of wanting to. And we were basically priced out of California. You know, we weren't going to be able to do it. If we were going to do it, we were going to make many compromises on where we were and what the property and the house were. So we looked north to Oregon, as I think many Californians do. But, you know, I went to college up here and I have family up here. So it made sense. And I know all the growers up here, or a lot of them, and I've worked with them for years. And it's just such a wonderful community. It's a zone colder. It's a lot wetter. There are a lot of differences, but it also didn't feel like that huge of a shift. That said, starting over is wild. It is, I'm trying now to like put a positive spin on it, but if you had talked to me a few months ago, I might not have been able to do that. It's just, you know, it's a big change. The physical move was, of course, a big part in setting up the new fields, but more than anything, it's just realizing the weight of leaving a customer base and a reputation I had built in California over 10 years. So we're just building up again, just starting. We don't have that many flowers yet, but we definitely don't have that many customers yet. So those, you know, hopefully they'll grow and blossom together.
So I was going to ask about the new dog, the new farm, and then you have something else new that I'm very excited for you.
Yes, thank you. I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book where...
I was talking about your tractor, but we can talk about the book too.
Oh, we have a tractor. I have a tractor. It's like a really happy country song or something, like got a tractor, got a dog, got a house, got a book. Yeah, we got a tractor. It's funny, Ellen Polishuk, who is wonderful, wrote an article about me in Growing for Market a few years ago, and she really focused on, you know what, like how is this person, Lennie, doing everything she does without a tractor? It's one of the most like intense operations I've seen without operations. Is still a strong word. I was still a small farm, but without a tractor. And so we did live so many years without a tractor, and already having one just for like moving stuff is game changing. And I kind of prided myself on not having one in a way, like we can make it work. I also didn't own land. It didn't make sense to have a tractor yet, but yeah, we got a Kubota 0% financing for 72 months. Highly recommend it.
That was one of the saddest parts of moving away, was leaving the tractor. But I brought the BCS, so I think I'm okay. But I do love a tractor. Okay, well, let's talk about the big issue, the big project that I know that I've known this was going on for a while. But you've been working on a big secret project.
Yes, this is the book, right? Not my other secret. No, there are no other secret projects. Yes, I have been working on a book with Chelsea Green, and it will be published early next year. So, there's so many different phases of the writing and the editing, and right now we are deep in the developmental edit before it goes on to like the copy editors. And my editor is actually Bailey's good friend, which is just so lovely. I feel, we have a professional relationship, yet I know that we have this other connection, and that just feels really sweet, and I feel really, in good hands. I worked with him and a few other people at Chelsea Green, and now it's circled back to me working with him as my primary editor, and he is just Matthew Durr. He's just wonderful. So yeah, the book is Flower Farming for Profit. The subtitle is going to be The Complete Guide to Growing Your Cut Flower Business. And it's been a labor of love. It's been really hard, actually. I think of myself as a writer. I've done lots of writing professionally, but writing a book, it's just, you get in your own head about it. You psych yourself out about it, But this is hopefully going to be, excuse me, a really great resource for people starting and growing their flower businesses.
Excellent. Can you tilt your camera down just a little bit so I see less zooming in more of you?
It was so perfect when I had it. Hang on one second. It was perfect when I had it.
There you are. More of you.
Practice in my camera. Yeah. Bear with me. That's fine. We can keep talking.
Yeah. So who specifically did you write this book for? I know you and I have both served on the board of the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers, and we talk a lot about how many new growers there are out there and how we can help each other figure this thing out. Because it's a big project if you don't come from a business background or a horticulture background or a marketing background, because you really need all three of those skills. So who's your target audience for this book?
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for asking. It, when I set out to write it, I really had two sort of groups of two target audiences in my mind. One is the people who have been growing for like 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. You know, some of them have been growing for 7 years, but on the side, some of them for 3 years full time. People, you know, who I've seen come up with me, or maybe I started farming just before them. And people for whom people who are at this point in their business where they know how to farm, they know how to grow their crops, they probably know how to sell their crops. But there's all these forks in the road and ways to grow the business. And often people, you know, turn towards scaling up the farm, like to do better on the farm, to do better financially, to have more of a work-life balance. The answer must be to grow more. And I really think that's not always the case. We both know so many farmers who have scaled their operation only to have more stress and only to work way more and only make a tiny bit more money at the end of the day. And it's not all about money, but it is all about staying in business and being able to keep doing what you love. So that's one group. It's the people who now face these business decisions. You know, I taught a lot of workshops this winter for this group in particular, for people who know how to farm, but they need a little help evaluating the opportunities that appear in front of them, you know, business decisions, how to develop systems, how to get in touch with their finances, how to learn basic bookkeeping so that they can make better business decisions. So it's for them. It's also just for the new growers who are starting out. And my whole kind of premise of the book is you need to learn these business skills from day one, just like you need to learn to grow the plants from day one. So rather than focus on growing and selling for 3 or 5 years and then turn around and be like, shoot, I need to get my bookkeeping in order. I need to figure out if it's better for me to continue selling at the farmer's market, or if a different wholesale avenue would be better. Should I build a farm stand? Should I rent another acre and plant peonies, whatever? It's like, I want people to be thinking about their farms as small businesses from day one, because that's what they are. They're small businesses. They're just really complicated, living, breathing, dynamic ones. But we're so busy farming and we like run ourselves ragged that it becomes impossible to learn these skills while you're farming. So this is a book that will hopefully bring in some of these topics from other industries, from, you know, small business training in general, and kind of apply it to the farm.
Great. Yeah, I can't agree with you more. When we started farming, we were really focused on dairy goats and pigs and baby chicks and all kinds of stuff. And at that point, our finances were kind of a mess. We weren't tracking things appropriately. Luckily, Vermont has some really good resources to help new farmers get their legs under themselves. So by the time we started growing flowers, we were thinking of it as a business. We were, you know, just really tracking every little detail that we could. Now, you can never track every detail, but what are some really, where should someone who's new at this, and maybe they've dabbled for a year or two as kind of on a garden scale, but they've decided, hey, it's time to start a business. Where would you send someone? And I agree that business help is probably the first thing you should be doing. Where do you even start to get started?
Yeah, I always circle back to wanting people to account for their time and their labor on one hand, and also really keep an eye towards sales in a systematic way on the other hand. So, you know, I've been really focused on sales projections recently, working with growers on sales projections. You know, just like when you're sitting back, maybe you have a season or two under your belt, maybe you're just starting, you have a half acre to work with, or you have a full acre to work with, or if you have a backyard to work with, what kind of sales do you imagine you might be able to get from that piece of land? I think often people shy away from setting these goals because they fear that they then won't be able to reach them, or they, you know, feel that they don't have even enough information to begin to set those goals or do those basic projections. But I think the earlier we can do them, the earlier we can reach them, the earlier we can do better, basically. So on a quarter acre with X amount of beds, what might that look like for your business? So that's one kind of like mindset that I would hope people would get into earlier in the game. But in terms of small business resources, I think getting help early on, and I know you and Thomas have talked about this. Thomas, I think, wrote a great article about this actually, but seeking bookkeeping or financial help early on, even before you call your business a business, even before you have that many sales. The more you can get help and understand the mechanics of your financial life early on, the better you'll do, and the better able you'll be to assess where you are and then where you can go. Because often it's just a mess for the first few years. It's like you cut and you sell flowers, you end up with some amount of sales, you end up with some amount of money in your pocket, and you're exhausted and you have to make decisions. But without the data and the plan, it's just harder to make those decisions. And we're making decisions based off of like whims rather than data or even estimates, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's, if you track your data, then you have data to make new decisions off of the following year. It's those first years, yeah, they're always going to be a roller coaster, but enjoy the ride, I think. So let's talk about you personally. When did you start farming, and how did you get to the point where you're making big business decisions and making big moves now?
Yeah.
We've both been through it, so, and I know we're both open to talk about our own mistakes and our own ups and downs.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I know most of us farmers really enjoy hearing other people talk through their challenges and their struggles and maybe areas where they've gone wrong. I also think it's really helpful to bring in the topics of money and sales and net income. And sometimes they're hard to talk about, not only because people feel, embarrassed or like that's private information, or maybe that it's like icky to talk about it, but also we don't want to always have those numbers at our fingertips. So, but anyways, all to say that I think that it's a part of the picture. You know, we often, and sorry, I will get to your question too, but it's like, it's all to say that I'll involve this in the conversation too, because I'll never forget a few years ago at some conference, I ran into a grower who was getting ready to retire. And I was like, how much are you still doing these days? And he was like, oh, we sell wholesale. I did about, 80 grand last year. And he meant in sales. He sold wholesale 80 grand worth of flowers. And that just gave me such an idea of his business, rather than most of us, which would say, oh, I grow on 1 acre. I sell at a stand and I sell some wholesale, but it's like, and money doesn't tell you everything about the business, not at all, but it does paint a big picture. That in that one quick sentence we had between sessions, I was able to understand like kind of the scale and the intensity of his operation. So I think context is really helpful when we are talking about our farms in terms of explaining them to others or helping others imagine, set goals for themselves. But all to say, okay, so I started farming. I did that Santa Cruz Farm and Garden program in like 2011. So this was my late 20s. I've been working in social work in Boston, where I'm from, and moved all over the world. Actually, I spent some time in Israel, lived in Israel for a year after high school. I was thinking how much I wish I had known about flowers back then, just listening to you talk about your trip. But moved all over, was kind of like never happy, doing work that I found to be really important, but I was really unfulfilled personally. And honestly, I don't talk about this a lot, but I think turning towards farming was a real way to kind of take charge of my mental health. I was able to find kind of peace and satisfaction and fulfillment on a really kind of deep personal level once I started farming. And I realized that that's what I've been looking for in everything else I did. And I had never found it. So moved to California to do the farm and garden program, then got hired to work there for a year as like a teacher, and then got a job up in Sonoma County, which landed me up there. And that's where I was for the past decade. So, or 8 years or something. Started running a vegetable and flower farm. We increased the number of flowers we grew while I worked there. But, my job was still sort of a social work job. I was teaching people to farm, working with local community groups, all of that. But on the side, I started growing flowers and, fell in love with them, and kind of the rest is history. So I started B-side alongside that farm while I was running it, and grew it over the years, and, did everything. Sold to florists, sold to supermarkets, so sold to some small wholesalers. I've always been a small farm, always an acre or under. I've leased more land than that at a time and had plans of growing bigger. I decided not to. really got deep into wedding design and ended up doing, really perfecting my small wedding program. And, then I built my farm stand, which was really, did really well. My farm stand was in California in kind of a touristy area on a road that led out to the coast, so it was well traveled. It didn't look like what you would expect as a road that would maybe have an amazing farm stand on it. It's really quick. It's really like dangerous and fast. So it's not like a picturesque touristy road, but I knew that the traffic was there and people were day tripping up from California, or from San Francisco rather. So I grew it over the years, and with a lot of effort, a lot of focus on what people wanted to buy, a lot of focus on my markup for my bouquets. In the end, that farm stand was grossing like $120,000 in sales every season, which was amazing, which was very successful and not wildly profitable, but profitable for a flower farming enterprise, and I loved doing it. So just to give you some kind of a sense of the scale, like I said, I think this context is always really helpful in talking about people's businesses. We always did around, the past few years, the farm in general, farm and weddings did around $200,000 in gross sales between the farm stand, less and less wholesale over the years. Weddings, which I used to do 15 to 20 weddings a year, and those would bring in $100,000. So, usually I would take on a new enterprise and phase out an old one. I phased out weddings as I moved into the farm stand. So,
yeah, I was going to ask you that. I'm hearing a few things. So to start with, you're doing what sounds like to be too much. You are doing veggies, you're doing flowers, you're selling wholesale, a bit retail, doing weddings, and probably trying to grow every crop there is, I'm guessing. How did you narrow it down to what was actually working for you in your life, and ultimately what was most profitable for your business?
Yeah. I'd say somewhere 4 or 5 years ago, I really looked at what I was doing. And, I think that year I was doing a lot of workshops. So, I do workshops with flower farmers, but I was also doing a lot of design workshops with just the public. So workshops as one kind of income stream, weddings, wholesale flower sales, and I think I just started the farm stand at that point. And I really looked at the gross sales of each enterprise. I tried to look at kind of the net profit or the take home for each enterprise. That's really hard to do, of course, for so many reasons. We all sort of, people, we define that net number sort of differently. Also, a lot of us are kind of expensing some cost of living stuff through the business, which, that means that everyone's doing it differently. Everyone has different mortgage expenses, whatever. So we're not always comparing apples to apples, but I don't think that means we shouldn't try to talk about it. I'll just say the other reason that it was difficult to track the net profit from each enterprise was that a lot of the expenses were shared throughout the enterprises. So it's my lease on my land, should it be distributed equally over weddings and workshops and this and that? Hard to say, but I came up with a method that worked for me, and I was able to see that workshops were the most popular, the most profitable thing I did. The farm stand was growing into that. Weddings were really profitable for me because I really worked at that. I managed my expenses and my time so carefully with weddings, way more than I ever did with farming. It actually was kind of the gateway for me to getting into thinking about efficiency and charging for my time that I then carried over into the farm. And I'm much worse at that at farming. I mean, multitasking is the enemy, the antithesis of efficiency, really. And it's so hard not to multitask or try to multitask when you have a small farm. So I looked at these enterprises and I said, which ones are the most worthwhile for me in my business? Of course, I also said, which do I like doing the best? Which, assuming that they all had sort of traction in the market, which ones performed the best financially and fulfilled me the most. And, weddings, even though they did really well for me, I looked around at one point and I was like, okay, I'm a wedding florist. I work in the events industry now. And yeah, I grow most of the flowers that I use for these weddings, but most of my time is spent talking and thinking about events. I don't even like events. What am I doing? So I found ways to replace that. And meanwhile, I was working outside of the farm a little bit in those last years. I was doing consulting with some private estates, and building a flower program for like a donation bouquet program on another property, and teaching at the junior college as well. So I brought in people to work for me and maintain the farm as I was doing these other things, both for personal fulfillment and also for money. And that's what allowed me to eventually buy the property in Oregon. So I was doing too much, you know, I was doing too much on the farm. So I'll just say that I evaluated the enterprises, really saw which were doing well, saw how much enjoyment I received from the farm stand, the honor system farm stand. I loved it. I love being able to make really quick, efficient bouquets that are just like, you know, a class above what you would find at the local store around me. So these were like florist quality bouquets with farm flowers that I grew, that I could mark up and charge. Not what a florist would charge, but I tried to charge 3 times what I would sell to a florist for, 3 times markup. I don't think I can get away with that here in Oregon. I think that there was more money floating around where I used to live, which made it hard to live there, but made it easy to sell these bouquets, easy-ish. And so I focused on what worked for me. And in the end, I really narrowed my crop plan down, and I narrowed my activities down too.
I think, like I said, we all kind of have that pitfall of just trying to do everything early on. And it's really hard to let go of something because you see the numbers like, oh, I'm making money there, but at probably my own physical cost, my own mental cost, you know, maybe my relationship is suffering because of it. It's okay to let go, right? It feels really good once you know, come to terms with the fact that you're still a farmer, you're still doing what you said you were going to do. You might just be just taking a different direction. I keep thinking about a few years back, I think it was Nashville, we both spoke at an ASCFG grower school maybe, and I think you were it was in your early days of talking business with people, like what should I grow? What kind of plans? And you had all kinds of great ideas, like like no one around you was growing Aquilegia. You're like, it's a great flower, beautiful, no one grows it. Maybe I'll start an Aquilegia farm. Maybe like only white flowers.
Only white flowers, I remember that. Yeah.
You had some really good ideas in there, but I think it just goes to show it doesn't have to look any one way. You only have to grow one crop to be a flower farmer. And I think it's to be adaptable and be willing to say no to one thing in order to open up other opportunities. You wrote a really some actual words of wisdom. I asked you for your wisdom, and you gave me some. You said, only take on opportunities that will clearly open doors to other opportunities. And I think I might get that as a tattoo. It was
so funny. You guys turned that into a little graphic, which I love. But it's funny, I wrote that too, sort of as a shorthand, as like a topic I thought I could discuss. I hadn't really thought through the words that carefully, and I'm like, does that roll off the tongue? Maybe it does.
Tell me where that came from, and expound.
It wasn't fine-tuned. The idea is fine-tuned. The catchphrase is not fine-tuned. But basically, this goes back to the skill that I really fought hard to learn, which is being able to silence all the distraction around you, especially in the middle of a farming season, and really make good decisions based on good information and all the information you have at the time. And so I know when I was a new farmer, all these opportunities would come my way, whether it was a restaurant down the street that had agreed to sell my flowers in bud vases on the tables, or whether it was a neighbor down the street who was trying to offer me a really good deal on leasing the land behind them because no one else, they hadn't been able to find anyone to lease it. And like, that's a red flag if no one wants to lease it. But so just, you know, not only things that are being offered to you, but also choices you might make, you know, whether to expand a certain crop, whether to hire an employee, whatever. But, you know, I was mainly thinking about sales when I wrote this, which is that in the beginning years of flower farming, most of us start out without a plan. So we're just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And to some extent, yes, of course you have to do that. Of course we can't know what's going to work for us, what the demand in our market is going to be right away. We have to try out things. But if we're going to try something out, I think we need to treat it as a real scientific experiment. So we go in, we know what information we need to gather. We therefore know what it's going to look like to succeed and what it's going to look like to fail. If I'm, doing flowers on the table at a local restaurant because the opportunity came my way, and I'm not making much money off of it, but I'm doing it because I hope to get this, this nebulous term, we hope to get exposure in the marketplace. What does that mean for me? And then, maybe write up a little plan or just have it in your mind. I'm going to try this out for 1 month. I'm going to go all in. And what does that look like? That means having flyers that they display up front, having business cards, making sure that the restaurant and I are promoting each other on social media, whatever it is. And if after 1 month or 2 months, I haven't gotten any other work from that, or I haven't seen, some indicator that my name, the farm's name is being shared throughout the community, then maybe it's not a good opportunity if I'm doing it for mostly exposure and not for money, so just, this really struck a chord with me, or, hit home for me during COVID, when I had really been trying to stop selling wholesale because it didn't make sense on my small farm. I think most of these farms that are like a half acre or less, building their business, whether they know it or not, on like a wholesale model of selling their stems at the lowest price possible. I question how they're going to make a living with that small of an operation selling at that low of a price point. I think that might be a better model for selling retail. Of course, there's so many caveats to that. The rise of cooperatives, I know, is helping smaller farms sell their stuff more easily. But all of these florists came knocking on my door during COVID because their main supply channels, the supply chain was upset. Of course, there were no flowers getting into people's hands, and they needed to buy from me. And I could have said, "Oh, what a great opportunity! All these new customers," but I had a hunch that most of these people were going to go back to buying from their big wholesalers after COVID. It wasn't the direction that I was headed already. I could sell all my flowers through my farm stand. So by kind of, changing course and selling to all these florists just because they were banging down my door, it wouldn't get me further in the plan that I had already created. So it just occurred to me that how good it felt to listen to my well-reasoned plan and listen to my gut and say, no, I have a plan that is doing better for me. Just because these opportunities are coming my way doesn't mean I need to take them. If they're not leading to sustained further sales down the road, they're not right for me. Of course, I helped out florists who were in a bind and I appreciated the support. Of course, all of that. But just because there's a certain kind of demand doesn't mean it's what's right for your business. So I really lean into this idea of if an opportunity comes your way, really trying to estimate whether or not it's going to lead to long-term sustained growth and like prosperity for your business. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I I agree that COVID it shook everything up, right? And I think we're still trying to process what just happened, because we've all just kind of started going again and haven't talked about this really giant thing that turned everything upside down. But saying no was one of the things that I learned during COVID, because we want to say yes. You're desperate for that business. You're new. You have bills to pay. And it's really hard to say no to someone when they're calling, asking to buy something. But sometimes that's really the best solution, because it opens you up, frees up a little time, either for your own well-being or for you to focus on that one thing you know is going to work. Really couldn't agree more. That's I don't know, we could just talk for probably 5 hours about everything we've learned about this process. So I'm sure in your book you're going to talk about everything from evaluating the profitability of a crop to different income streams. What are the things you should be looking for if you're, maybe adding a new crop to your lineup? How do you go about even understanding if that's making you money or not?
Yeah, yeah.
Get a little
So
more brass tacks here.
yeah, I love it. We all know that we should be pricing our crops based on some understanding of the cost of production of them, right? But most people are wildly out of touch with the cost of production on their crops. I mean, I am too. I can say that I only know a handful of farmers, and I know a lot of farmers. I only know a handful of farmers who have run real enterprise budgets on their crops, i.e., cost of production studies. How much time and how many inputs go into the growing of a certain crop. And then of course that goes into the cost, and then that combined with your selling price and your quantity sold will come together to show you the relative profit of that crop, or sometimes known as the contribution margin. And so we can start taking steps to understanding how much a crop costs to go without doing one of these huge formal studies. Of course, it's really hard to do. I remember you talked about Richard Wiswall's book a few weeks ago, which is so wonderful and has really detailed instructions on how to run enterprise budgets. It's also just a really confusing process, and it's funny because it's not rocket science. It's basically we're trying to time how much time we are spending on our crops, right? Count the amount of time we're spending on our crops, and then the inputs that go into growing it. But that's hard. It's also hard to track the yield of our crops because most of us are selling through so many channels. I know when I was selling through weddings and my farm stand and wholesale, I only had really good accounting for the crops that I sold wholesale because I had invoices for them. Right. I was never taking the time to write down how many snapdragons went into bouquets for the farm stand. And it's not many farms that do that. Bigger farms who have been around longer have a better sense of their yield. But most of us small, diverse, new, mixed farms don't. So I've been doing this grant-funded research for the past few years, funded through Western SARE. And last year we did a small version of the grant with 4 growers where we tracked the cost of production on a few crops. I worked with Oregon Tilth, Tanya Murray, and a system she developed with the OSU Small Farms Program. And it's called Know Your Cost to Grow. And it's a really detailed way of tracking, doing time studies on the main activities that occur on your farm, applying those to the crops you grow, tracking the yield, and then figuring out basically which crops are doing better than others for you on your farm. We're expanding that study this year to include 11 farms, and I'm also bringing in another farm viability specialist, John Hendrickson, from University of Wisconsin-Madison, who was helping me do a larger kind of benchmark study for flower farms. So we're looking at the relative, gross income, net income, labor hours per acre, that kind of thing, to start to try to establish some of these benchmarks for flower farms so that we can wrap our head around what those numbers might on average look like for different size farms, because we don't really have that information. Right. So what we learned from our kind of initial data from last year is that most farms, for most crops, harvest is a huge, I'll say, time sink for crops. You can intuit that just by thinking through the process, but in reality, it's just true. It's harvest and weeding, and often our transplants or rising bulb costs, all of that are the biggest costs that go into these crops. And so that means most of these farms, when looking at their data last year, they could say, okay, if we wanted to start somewhere, we could look at the harvest process and say, how can we streamline this process? How can we make it more efficient? So I think for farms just starting out to try to wrap their head around cost of production, they can look at their harvest process and time it across a few different crops. You can set your stopwatch for 5 minutes and see how many stems of a certain crop you got, or you can time yourself during the duration of the harvest and start to look at that. And of course you need a bigger picture to really evaluate one crop versus the other, because just because one is a quicker harvest, the other one might be a slow harvest but have really expensive plant costs. it's a more complicated matrix, but starting to look at little snapshots of things like harvest and transplanting to see where your time is going and therefore where you can make the greatest gains in efficiency. It's hard, and in general, another place I would say to start is to start to look at a crop. I'm gonna like grab a crop so I can talk through it. Okay, look at this ranunculus and don't make assumptions about its profitability for you. Like, we know that the corms are pretty expensive. We also know that we can get a fairly, a high-ish selling price in a lot of markets for ranunculus. But we also know that it takes often some time to grow them with soaking, pre-sprouting, the way that a lot of people do it. So I think it's easy to look at a crop and be like, oh, ranunculus, I should grow ranunculus because everyone grows ranunculus. It's really popular, and I can probably get like $2 a stem for it. But making that assumption leaves out all those other factors of all the futzing that goes into growing it, the high cost of the plant material, and those all have to weigh into your understanding of how well that crop is going to do for you. So like, I think garden roses are a great example. Like, I remember when I first put in my garden roses and I was like, ooh, I can get such a high price per stem. Like, it's a fancy crop. I can get like $2.50 a stem. Therefore I should grow them, and therefore they're going to make me a lot of money. But like, you have to think about the yield of the plant. Like, a lot of them aren't that productive. Maybe they have a few flushes a year. They can be pretty needy. They have to be sold pretty quickly. A lot of those David Austins don't have the greatest vase life, like all these other things. So even if you don't have all the information, just thinking through all those factors to determine whether or not it's going to be a good crop for you is a place to start.
Yeah, agreed. You don't have to do all of your crops at once, but it's pretty easy at the end of the season to sit back and say, okay, like, what were the challenges with this one? If you lose half your ranunculus to voles or something, was it really worth your time?
Yeah.
Did you actually make money on that crop? I think you'd often be surprised that you can do without some things that you thought you really couldn't live without. Maybe grow a little patch because you're passionate about them, but
right. And that just because you have demand for a certain crop doesn't mean, just because you're like, what will my florist think if I stop growing ranunculus? Like, they'll be fine. They'll buy it from somewhere else, and maybe they'll buy all your snaps, which do a lot better for you on your farm or whatever it is. Just because someone's not banging down your door with a certain crop's name in mind doesn't mean you're not going to be able to sell all of them. And also, the loudest voices do not equate to like a large demand. You know what I mean? Like, there's some florists who will be upset you're not growing ranunculus, but if they only buy 10 bunches from you a year, doesn't matter if you're not growing it for them.
Absolutely. I have a couple questions here from some of our listeners here today. Bellows Flower Farm says, if you're installing a hoop house for the first time ever, what 5 crops do you grow there? My goal is to have flowers for events, corporate and weddings, and also flowers for florists. I have some answers. What comes to mind when you get a question like that? Because I get questions like this pretty often, and I try to take a lot of time to really talk to people about how you go about deciding, do you put up a hoop house, and what takes up that valuable real estate?
Right. And, hoop houses play different roles on different farms, but I'd say the biggest reason to put in that hoop house is likely season extension, right? So you're trying to alter your microclimate to get crops to bloom earlier in the season and or later in the season. And so some of those reasons can, it can extend your growing season. It can get you into market earlier in some really cold climates with a really challenging short growing season like you had in Vermont. It can feel hard, it's probably pretty hard to get by as a flower farm without hoop houses in Vermont, right? And that short of a growing season. So I would look at, she's trying to sell through a few different markets. Yeah. It's funny. I always want so much more information.
Sure. So I would start with, you got to do some market research. You have to know what's out there and see what the demand is, because just because ranunculus is sexy and you can have it early, maybe you're down the road from someone who's doing a lot of ranunculus.
Right.
I saw today Erin at Raindrops Farm posted how much she loves marigolds and a big tunnel full of marigolds, and that would be the last thing I would recommend. But Erin has found a need for that, and she can get them earlier and have a supply of them sooner if she starts them in her high tunnel, and for her that works. So I think really figuring out your market, who's buying what in your area, and do you have a hunch that you can do that profitably and do it well?
Totally. And if this person is asking this question, which I think is wonderful, it does tell us that they might be just getting started. And I think spending a lot of money on expensive plant material is a tricky way to go from the beginning. So what other crops would really thrive from being in that tunnel that are a cheaper upfront cost? Therefore, if something goes wrong, they're out less money. So I wouldn't go to expensive tulips or clone ranunculus. I might go to snapdragons or campanula, or laya. All things that are cheaper to grow from seed or from plug. I order my campanula and orlaya from Farmer Bailey Plugs every fall and plant it, and it's wonderful and it's tall and it's necessary in the market, and those are other early crops that are needed in a lot of markets, but aren't going to have that upfront cost. And upfront cost doesn't need to be a hindrance, but if you are new to the crop, if you don't have the established demand yet, it's a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, look back at the photos from my first year of the high tunnel, and there's, I think there was a big row of Lysianthus, which did well, and I sold well, and that was a great thing to put in a tunnel. Also, quality is just better on some things in a tunnel. And then in the middle of the tunnel, I think I had like some callas and some sunflowers and some lilies, and there were a couple of sweet peas in the corner, and it was just a hodgepodge of everything because I wanted to put everything in there. And probably none of it really made me any money. So there's a trial and error component. I think figuring out your market, spending time learning your market. I always recommend it if you've done floral design and you look at a centerpiece or a bouquet, you might have 5 stems of stock in there and 3 stems of snapdragons and one focal flower. So if you think about that in terms of your production, you really need a lot more of those filler, bulky things that bulk up your arrangement than you do the specialty focal flowers. But yeah, it all comes down to your market. I hate to say it. I wish there was a top 5 that will make you money guaranteed. But it really just depends on what's being sold in your area. I know you're in an affluent part of California, but also you have a lot of big commercial growers, supplying the entire country. And the prices are much lower in California than they are on the East Coast. So what made sense for me in Vermont didn't necessarily make sense for you in Sonoma.
Right.
Right. Still Eden Flowers asked, we really want our farm stand to grow into one of the main parts of our business. What are the things we should focus on to get it working? We have pretty slow sales as we are not on a busy road. We'd love to have it be a go-to for people's flower needs. Yeah. I always wanted to have a farm stand, but we were just so far from population centers that we never went for it. But it always sounded really enticing to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say I thought through the specifics of my farm stand ad nauseum. Like basically, I'm going to talk about signage and how it sounds like such a simple answer, but I drove around the few miles around my farm stand over and over and over, thought through exact locations where a sign might be helpful, where someone might the traffic might slow, and that might be a good place to put in my sign. And it says farm stand next left. Okay, farm stand next left. That doesn't say that it's flowers. I can only fit so many words on a sign. Is it flower farm stand next left? And by saying next left, are they going to think it's that dirt driveway right there? So I like really fine tuned it. And so I eventually had professional signs made. I'm just horrible at everything like that. So I had professional signs made eventually. You don't need professional signs, but you need colors that are going to stand out on the side of the road. It's worth investing a little bit of money, and you can make them pretty cheaply. Doing a consistent color scheme through the signs. Say 1 mile ahead, like thinking through the exact placement of each sign and what information is most important to get on that sign. Because I heard so many people saying, I've driven past your farm stand for years and it's the first time that I stopped. And so I said, okay, how can I delay that process where they first see the sign and they're saying, oh, there's a farm stand ahead. Is today the day we're going to go? If I have that sign half a mile earlier, are they going to be able to convince the other person in their car that they can stop that time rather than waiting for the next time they're in town? So signage is everything. And if you're not on a busy road, you're going to need to travel a little bit farther and see how you can put signs in other areas. Also, really getting the information of the people who do come to your farm stand, asking for email signups, asking them to spread the word, maybe doing a contest where if they spread a picture from your farm stand on social media, they go into a drawing or they get a free bouquet or they just get your appreciation, whatever it is. I also invested eventually in a few magazine ads and I was right to do all these things because it paid off, you know? So I think thinking through what marketing budget you might have for your farm stand, and you might say, oh, I don't have a marketing budget. Well, can you allocate $500, $700 towards doing a targeted effort at getting the word out about your farm stand? Whether that is, you know, making more postcards for local businesses, getting in a local magazine, like whatever it is in your area. I think you're right that just getting people there is what you need to do. I have a little, like a short course on my farm stand available on my website if anyone wants to. It's just one of those pre-recorded courses that you buy and you can watch whatever, just giving you tips for setting up the farm stand, thinking through your price points, thinking through the signage, all those little things.
Great.
But as you can see, it's like everyone's building farm stands and they're doing so wonderful.
Yeah, to that end, I just 2 days ago in Madeira, there's this well-known orchid grower. I was meeting people there for a tour. I've always wanted to see this place. There's nothing on Facebook, no website, no Instagram. I know kind of the neighborhood. There's a sign that says orchid grower this way. And I go that way and there's a closed gate and I can't get there. So I have to like go down this very steep hill and back up and around an entire block. And then I get there and it's still honestly not obvious where I'm supposed to go. There's no prices on anything. I don't know what's for sale. I see one sign that says not for sale, and I think it was one bench. So I think you do have to make it as unconfusing as possible.
Yeah.
Like, here's how this works. Here's where we are. We're happy to have you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree about, you know, signage and branding. If that's not your strong suit, by all means, hire someone to make it look good for you.
Yeah. Because
you're a beautiful designer and you do excellent work and lovely color combinations, but if your handwriting isn't good and you don't want to handwrite a sign, like, pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we're going to last a few minutes here. You reference your website, so tell us where people can find more about your workshops, your consulting, your book, or I know it's not quite ready to go yet, but where we can find that eventually, where we can follow you.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a sleeping guy. So my website, B-Side Farm. You can sign up for my newsletter on B-Side Farm. I've been horrible about my newsletter recently, but all the information about the book and everything else will go out on that. I have, you know, eventually there'll be a website, Flower Farming for Profit, which will have all my book related stuff. And I'll also migrate my courses that I do over there. But I have another Instagram, which is Flower Farming for Profit, which is theoretically where I'm putting more of my grower oriented content, like the nerdy stuff about the cost of production, all that. So I've been pretty bad about posting. And then also on B-Side Farm, I have my workshops and my business courses. So I taught a business retreat this winter, which was really well attended and went over really well, kind of thinking through a lot of the stuff we've talked about today. I don't have any more scheduled right now, but if anyone's interested, they can always send me an email. I also have an open coaching call, I'm calling it, for there's a date in June so I have, you know, monthly coaching call with a bunch of growers who have taken my business workshop every month. Those are full, but I try to do one every once in a while where anyone who has any question can come in and chat with me, and then also get advice from the other people on the call if they want to. So I think it's $50 or $55 to sign up for this 2-hour open Zoom session. So you guys should go in and sign up for that if you're interested in that. Sometimes it's nice just to get a second opinion. I don't have all the answers, but I can think through how to get you those answers. And it's just a really great way to get some camaraderie too.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's there's a lot to think about, and I think you and I are similar in that we both think about things from a lot of different angles. And once you think it through 500 times, you know exactly, you can find your direction, but it can be a little overwhelming. It'd be really fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're probably really enjoying starting over. Like, how many times did I just want to walk away and start over? And I've done that recently, and so have you. It's
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I'm going to take that with me today. Isn't this fun starting over rather than like, ah! But, oh, sorry.
both,
You're
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a couple of growing questions I'm going to answer here. Someone said the closest spacing for scoop scabioses. I would give them at least 12 by 12 inches. Those things get big, even a little more. I like a double row down, like to put them in a double row down the bed. Maybe you could squeeze them to 8 inches, but they get large. And someone said, would you give Dusty Miller space in the hoop house? And I think if you've got a good market for Dusty Miller, it can be frozen and frosted. It can go for a really long time into the fall. It can sit there all winter and you have it in spring. I don't know if it was Jamie Rhoda or someone I talked about. I think it was one of their top selling crops. And it doesn't seem like something that you would devote to your high tunnel, but if that's what's really working for you, by all means, fill up your tunnel with Dusty Miller. It might just pay for that tunnel. Well, great, Lennie, we're about out of time, so I know we could talk forever. I'm happy to see you. I'm glad you're doing well. Thanks for giving us a little peek behind the curtain of the upcoming book. I think it was very needed in this field, and I know we're all excited about it. I'm glad Chelsea Green has agreed to help bring this topic to the rest of us.
Yeah, me too, and thank you. It's great to see you. I miss you guys, and I'm going to get to Portugal one day. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. And I love this resource that Farmer Bailey Plugs is putting out there. It's wonderful.
Great. Well, thanks, Lennie. Appreciate you.
All right. Bye. Say goodbye, Stephen. Say goodbye, Stephen.